I'm Scarlett Martinez. 29 and 3 weeks ago, I discovered something that shattered everything I believed about family loyalty. While scrolling through Instagram, I saw my sister Vanessa's post celebrating her new Tesla luxury downtown condo and what she casually mentioned as a life-changing inheritance of $10 million. The shocking part, I wasn't even invited to our grandmother's will reading. For 29 years, I thought we were equals in our family. I was wrong. Dead wrong. And what I uncovered next would destroy our family forever. But before we dive into this twisted tale of family betrayal and the sweet revenge that followed, I want to connect with all of you watching from around the world. Whether you're tuning in from New York, London, Tokyo, or anywhere else, drop your location in the comments below. If this story of family drama and ultimate justice sounds like something that'll keep you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because you won't believe the bombshells I'm about to drop. Trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why sometimes blood isn't thicker than water and karma always finds a way. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, the Martinez family looked picture perfect from the outside. Mom worked as a nurse at the local hospital, Dad managed a successful auto repair shop, and Vanessa and I were the golden girls of Westview High. Our grandmother Abuela Rosa was the heart of our family. She'd immigrated from Mexico in the 1960s, worked 3 jobs to put her children through school, and eventually built a small empire through real estate investments and a chain of authentic Mexican restaurants. Every Sunday, without fail, our entire extended family would gather at Abuela's sprawling ranch-style home for dinner. The house always smelled like fresh tortillas and her famous mole sauce. She'd sit at the head of the massive dining table telling stories about the old days while sneaking extra dessert to whichever grandchild needed it most. Vanessa and I would fight over who got to sit closest to her, both of us desperate for her approval and attention. Vanessa, 3 years older than me, was everything I aspired to be. She was valedictorian prom queen and earned a full scholarship to Stanford for business school. I was the artistic one, always sketching or writing content to live in my sister's shadow. Our parents constantly compared us, but never maliciously. Vanessa's got the business sense, Mom would say, but Scarlett has the creative soul. I thought it meant we each had our special place in the family hierarchy. Abuela Rosa seemed to love us equally. She funded my art supplies and supported my dream of becoming a graphic designer just as enthusiastically as she celebrated Vanessa's academic achievements. When I started my freelance design business after college, Abuela was my first client, hiring me to redesign her restaurant logos and marketing materials. When Vanessa landed her high-powered job at a tech startup in San Francisco, Abuela threw her a celebration party that the whole neighborhood attended. But looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The private conversations between Abuela and Vanessa that stopped whenever I entered the room. The way Vanessa would sometimes smirk when Abuela praised my work, as if she knew something I didn't. The expensive jewelry that would mysteriously appear on Vanessa during family gatherings, pieces she'd brush off as vintage finds when I complimented them. 3 months ago, Abuela's health started declining rapidly. The diabetes she'd managed for decades suddenly worsened and she was in and out of the hospital. Our family took turns staying with her, but Vanessa seemed to be there more often than anyone else. She'd taken a leave of absence from her job, claiming she needed to care for our grandmother. I was touched by her dedication, even though my own freelance schedule made it harder for me to spend as much time at the hospital. During what turned out to be Abuela's final week, I was dealing with a major project deadline for my biggest client. I felt terrible about not being there 24/7, but Vanessa assured me she had everything handled. "Focus on your work, Scarlett," she said with what I thought was sisterly understanding. "I've got Abuela covered. You can visit when your project is finished." I trusted her completely. We were sisters after all. We'd been through everything together. High school heartbreaks, college stress, career challenges. The idea that she might be manipulating the situation for her own benefit never crossed my mind. I was just grateful to have such a caring, responsible sister who could take care of our beloved grandmother while I handled my professional obligations. The funeral was beautiful. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Former employees from her restaurants, neighbors she'd helped over the years, local business owners she'd mentored. Vanessa gave a touching eulogy about Abuela's legacy and her impact on our family. I spoke too, sharing stories about Abuela's encouragement of my artistic dreams. We cried together, held each other, and promised to honor Abuela's memory by staying close as a family. After the service, Vanessa mentioned that the lawyer would be handling Abuela's estate matters in a few weeks. "It's just formalities," she said. "You know how these legal things work. There's probably just the house to deal with, maybe some small bequests." I nodded, not particularly concerned about inheritance details. I was still grieving and trying to process the loss of the woman who'd been like a second mother to me. When weeks passed without any mention of a will reading or estate settlement, I assumed everything was tied up in probate court, which I'd heard could take months or even years. Vanessa seemed to be handling all the legal aspects, and I was grateful not to deal with the bureaucratic headaches while I was still processing my grief. That's why seeing her Instagram post hit me like a freight train. The Tesla Model S gleaming in her driveway. The keys to a luxury high-rise condo in downtown San Francisco's most exclusive neighborhood. And most shocking of all, her casual mention of a $10 million inheritance from Abuela in the caption, followed by gratitude hashtags and celebration emojis. $10 million. I'd had no idea Abuela was worth that much money. And more importantly, I'd had no idea there was a will reading that I wasn't invited to attend. As I stared at my phone screen in my tiny studio apartment eating ramen noodles for the third night in a row because my latest client was late on payment, I felt something crack inside my chest. It wasn't just the money, though the financial disparity stung. It was the complete exclusion. The way my own family had cut me out of something so significant without even telling me it was happening. I tried calling Vanessa immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, but she didn't respond. Finally, I called my parents, my hands shaking as I dialed their number. "Mom," I said, when she answered, "I just saw Vanessa's post about inheriting from Abuela." "What will reading? Why wasn't I told about this?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that I thought the call had dropped. Scarlett Honey Mom's voice finally came through the phone, strained and uncomfortable. "We thought Vanessa had talked to you about this." "Talked to me about what exactly?" "About being completely excluded from our grandmother's will, reading about inheriting $10 million that I apparently have no claim to." What exactly was she supposed to tell me? "Sweetheart, you need to understand." Dad's voice came through. He'd apparently picked up the other phone. "Abuela Rosa made some very specific decisions about her estate. She was very clear about her wishes." "What wishes? What are you talking about?" "I was her granddaughter too. I took care of her, I loved her, I worked for her business." My voice was rising and I could feel panic creeping into my chest. The will was very detailed. Mom continued her nurse's training, keeping her voice artificially calm. "Abuela left everything to Vanessa. The restaurants, the real estate investments, the cash assets, everything. She felt that Vanessa had the business acumen to continue her legacy properly. But what about me? There had to be something for me, right? Even a small bequest or a personal item." I was pacing now, my small apartment suddenly feeling like a cage. Another long silence. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "She left you her collection of cookbooks and some old photographs. Vanessa has them at her place." Cookbooks and photographs. While my sister inherited a business empire worth millions, I got recipes and old pictures. The inequality was so staggering that I almost laughed. Almost. "When did this will reading happen?" I demanded. 2 days after the funeral, Mom admitted quietly. "It was a private meeting with just the immediate beneficiaries." "I'm not an immediate beneficiary, I'm her granddaughter. According to the will, only Vanessa was named as heir." The lawyer said Abuela had updated her will several times over the past few years, and the final version was very clear about her intentions. I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were trembling so violently that I could barely hold the phone. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my place in it, about my grandmother's love for me had just crumbled to dust. But the more I thought about it, the more things didn't add up. Abuela Rosa had always treated Vanessa and me equally. She'd invested in my business, celebrated my achievements, and never shown any favoritism toward Vanessa's career over my creative pursuits. The woman who had spent years telling me that both her granddaughters were equally precious to her had somehow decided to leave one granddaughter everything and the other granddaughter nothing. I spent the next 3 days doing nothing but researching estate law and trying to piece together what had happened. I learned that in Arizona, you can't completely disinherit a grandchild without very specific language in the will. I also discovered that if someone was deliberately excluded, they were supposed to be notified of the probate proceedings even if they weren't beneficiaries. More importantly, I started making phone calls. I called Abuela's lawyer, but his secretary said he couldn't discuss estate matters with non-beneficiaries. I called the probate court and discovered that the will hadn't actually been filed for public probate yet, which was unusual for an estate of that size. Most suspicious of all, when I asked for a copy of the death certificate to start my own inquiry, I was told that someone had placed a privacy restriction on it. That's when I decided to hire my own attorney. Patricia Chen was a no-nonsense estate lawyer with 20 years of experience, and when I explained my situation, she immediately raised red flags about the handling of the estate. It's very unusual for a will reading to happen so quickly after death, she told me during our first meeting. Most lawyers wait at least 2 weeks to allow for family members to be properly notified, and the privacy restriction on the death certificate is definitely suspicious. In my experience, that's usually only done when someone is trying to hide something. Patricia filed a formal request for information about Abuela's estate, and within 48 hours we hit our first major roadblock. The law firm that supposedly handled the will reading claimed they had no record of representing Rosa Martinez's estate. The lawyer, whose name my parents had given me, said he'd never met my grandmother and had no knowledge of any will reading. "Someone's lying," Patricia said bluntly. "Either your family is completely confused about which lawyer they met with, or there was no legitimate will reading at all." That evening, I drove to Abuela's house for the first time since the funeral. Vanessa had mentioned that she was handling the property until it could be sold, but I needed to see it for myself. I still had a key that Abuela had given me years ago, and legally, until the estate was properly settled, I had every right to enter the property as a potential heir. The house felt empty and cold, stripped of most of Abuela's personal belongings. But in her home office, I found something that changed everything. Hidden behind a family photo in her desk drawer was a folder labeled Will, Final Version in Abuela's handwriting. Inside was a will dated just 3 months before her death. According to this document, Abuela Rosa had left her entire estate to be split equally between my 2 beloved granddaughters, Vanessa Elena Martinez and Scarlett Isabella Martinez. There were specific provisions for both of us to continue her business legacy, together with Vanessa handling operations and me managing marketing and design. This will was notarized, properly witnessed, and included a handwritten note in Spanish. Para mis nietas queridas, que siempre trabajen juntas, como familia. For my beloved granddaughters, may you always work together as family. Sitting in Abuela's empty office holding the real will in my hands, I finally understood what had happened. Vanessa hadn't just inherited everything by legitimate means. She had stolen my inheritance, lied to our entire family, and somehow managed to convince everyone that this fraud was Abuela's actual wishes. But she had made one critical mistake. She hadn't thought to search for the real will. Armed with the real will, I immediately called Patricia Chen. She reviewed the document and confirmed its authenticity. The notary stamps were legitimate. The witnesses were properly identified, and most importantly, It was dated more recently than any other version we'd discovered. This changes everything, Patricia said. If this is the legitimate final will, then everything that's happened with the estate is fraud. We need to move quickly before any more assets are transferred or hidden. But before we could take legal action, I needed to understand exactly how Vanessa had pulled off this deception. Patricia advised me to document everything carefully, because we'd need to prove not just that fraud had occurred, but exactly how it had been executed. I started with the most obvious question: if there was no real will reading. With a legitimate lawyer who had Vanessa met with to convince my parents that she was the sole heir. It took 3 days of careful investigation. But I finally traced the answer through Vanessa's social media connections. David Morrison was a college friend of Vanessa's from Stanford, who had dropped out of law school after 2 years. He'd never passed the bar exam and wasn't licensed to practice law, but his LinkedIn profile was carefully crafted to make him appear like a successful estate attorney. Vanessa had flown him to Phoenix, put him up in a nice hotel, and had him conduct a fake will reading using a forged document. The fake will was masterfully done. It included Abuela's forged signature and fake witness signatures from 2 of the restaurant employees who had actually died several years ago. David had presented it to my parents in a downtown office building where he'd rented a conference room for the day, complete with fake business cards and a temporary law firm letterhead. But the most chilling part of the conspiracy was how long Vanessa had been planning it. Going through Abuela's papers more carefully, I found evidence that Vanessa had been systematically isolating our grandmother from other family members for months before her death. She'd convinced Abuela to change her phone number, telling relatives it was for privacy during her illness. She'd intercepted mail and controlled who could visit Abuela in the hospital. During what turned out to be the final week when I was working on my deadline and trusting Vanessa to handle everything, my sister had been systematically manipulating our dying grandmother. I found a notebook in Abuela's handwriting that detailed conversations where Vanessa had convinced her that I was too busy with work to visit, and that I didn't really care about the family business. The notebook entries written in Abuela's shaky handwriting during her final days were heartbreaking. Vanessa says Scarlett is angry about the business decisions. Maybe I was wrong about her commitment to family. Maybe Vanessa is right that she should handle everything. Vanessa had spent Abuela's final week poisoning her against me, making our grandmother believe that I didn't care about her or the family legacy. But there was also evidence that Abuela never actually changed her will. The real will I'd found was her final version, and she died before Vanessa could manipulate her into changing it. That's when I realized the full scope of my sister's betrayal. She hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She'd stolen my relationship with our grandmother during her final days. She'd made Abuela die believing that I didn't love her, that I was selfish and ungrateful. The emotional damage went far deeper than the financial theft. I also discovered that Vanessa had been transferring assets immediately after the fake will reading. She'd liquidated 3 of Abuela's investment accounts within 48 hours, moved money to offshore accounts, and had already put 2 of the restaurant properties up for sale. She was trying to convert everything to cash and hide it as quickly as possible. The timeline revealed just how calculated everything had been. Vanessa had requested leave from her job 2 weeks before Abuela's health crisis began. She'd been planning this theft for months, waiting for the right opportunity to execute her plan. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Patricia and I developed a comprehensive legal strategy that would expose every aspect of the fraud and ensure that Vanessa faced serious criminal charges, not just civil liability. If you're still with me on this incredible journey, you're probably feeling the same mix of rage and heartbreak that I felt when I uncovered each piece of this puzzle. This story gets even more intense from here, and I promise you that justice does get served in the most satisfying way possible. But I want to pause for a moment to ask you something. Have you ever had someone you trusted completely betray that trust? Someone who was supposed to have your back, but stabbed you in it instead? Let me know in the comments below, because Unfortunately, I know I'm not the only one who's experienced this kind of family betrayal. And if you're invested in seeing how I got my revenge and ensured that karma came full circle, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on because the next parts of this story will absolutely blow your mind. Our first move was to file an emergency injunction to freeze all of Abuela's assets before Vanessa could hide them permanently. Patricia argued that there was clear evidence of fraud and that immediate action was necessary to preserve the estate. The judge granted the injunction within 24 hours, which meant that all of Vanessa's new toys, the Tesla, the condo, the offshore accounts, were immediately frozen. Vanessa found out about the injunction when her credit card was declined at an upscale restaurant in San Francisco. According to the court documents, she called the bank in a panic, only to be told that all accounts associated with the Martinez estate had been legally frozen pending investigation. She called me within an hour, and for the first time in weeks I answered. "Scarlett, what the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed into the phone. "I'm doing what Abuela would have wanted," I said calmly. "I'm making sure her real wishes are honored." Her real wishes. Are you insane? The will was clear. Which will, Vanessa? The fake one you had your college dropout friend present to mom and dad? Or the real one I found in Abuela's desk, where she left everything to both of us equally? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally said, but her voice had lost all its confidence. "I'm talking about David Morrison, who never passed the bar. I'm talking about the forged signatures from dead people. I'm talking about the notebook where Abuela wrote about how you convinced her that I didn't care about the family." Should I keep going? I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Finally, she spoke again, and her voice was completely different. Cold and calculating. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, I can. And I'm going to. See you in court, sister." The next 6 weeks turned into the most intense legal battle our small community had ever witnessed. Patricia Chen assembled a team of investigators and forensic accountants who methodically dismantled every aspect of Vanessa's fraud. What we discovered was even more extensive than I'd initially realized. Vanessa hadn't just stolen from Abuela's estate. She'd been embezzling from the restaurant businesses for over 2 years. She'd convinced Abuela that the declining profits were due to market conditions and that the restaurants needed restructuring, when in reality, Vanessa had been skimming money from the accounts and inflating expenses to cover her tracks. The money she'd been living on in San Francisco, the luxury lifestyle she'd maintained while supposedly on leave from her tech job, had all been funded by stealing from our dying grandmother's businesses. The forensic accountant traced over $400 0 stolen funds that Vanessa had taken before Abuela's death, money she'd used to pay for her San Francisco lifestyle, expensive vacations, and designer clothes. She'd been systematically bleeding Abuela's businesses dry while convincing our grandmother that the financial problems were beyond anyone's control. But the most damaging evidence came from Vanessa's own digital footprint. Her phone records showed extensive communication with David Morrison dating back 6 months before Abuela's death. Text messages revealed detailed planning of the fake will reading, including discussions about forging signatures and creating fake witness testimonies. Even more shocking, we discovered that Vanessa had researched how to isolate elderly relatives and manipulate inheritance situations. Her browser history showed months of searches for topics like how to change elderly parents' will, isolating family members from inheritance, and legal requirements for will witnesses in Arizona. The criminal investigation moved swiftly once we presented our evidence to the district attorney. Vanessa was charged with elder fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit theft. David Morrison was charged as her accomplice. The charges carried potential sentences of up to 15 years in prison. But Vanessa wasn't going down without a fight. She hired an expensive criminal defense attorney and began a campaign to discredit me and the evidence we'd gathered. Her lawyer claimed that I had fabricated the real will out of jealousy and greed, and that Vanessa was the victim of a vindictive sister who couldn't accept Abuela's legitimate decision to favor the more responsible granddaughter. The defense strategy was particularly cruel because it forced me to relive every moment of my relationship with Abuela in public. Vanessa's lawyer painted me as the artistic granddaughter who had never shown real interest in the family business, while Vanessa was the dedicated businesswoman who had sacrificed her own career to care for our grandmother. The preliminary hearing was a nightmare. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table in a conservative business suit, looking every inch the successful executive who was being wrongly accused. When she testified, she spoke eloquently about her love for Abuela and her devastation at being accused of such terrible crimes by her own sister. "Scarlett has always been jealous of my success," she said on the witness stand, tears streaming down her face. "I understand that she's grieving and looking for someone to blame for feeling left out, but I would never hurt Abuela. I loved her more than anything in the world." It was a masterful performance, and I could see some of the courtroom observers buying into her narrative. Even some of our extended family members seemed unsure about who to believe. Vanessa had always been the golden child, the one everyone expected to succeed. The idea that she could be capable of such elaborate fraud was difficult for people to accept. But Patricia had prepared for this. We had the forensic evidence, the digital trail, and most importantly, we had David Morrison. Faced with his own criminal charges and the overwhelming evidence of his participation in the fraud, David accepted a plea bargain in exchange for testifying against Vanessa. His testimony was devastating because he provided insider details about how the conspiracy had been planned and executed. "Vanessa contacted me 8 months ago," he testified. "She said she needed help with a family legal matter and offered to pay me $50,000 to pose as an estate attorney. She provided all the details about the fake will and coached me on what to say to her parents. She told me that her grandmother was dying, and that she needed to correct an unfair inheritance situation before it was too late." David's testimony revealed that Vanessa had originally tried to get him to help her forge a completely new will while Abuela was still alive. When he refused to go that far, she'd settled for the plan to create a fake will reading after Abuela's death. "She was very specific about the timeline," David continued. "She said she needed to move quickly after the funeral to establish her legal claim before anyone could question it. She believed that if she could get her parents to accept the fake will and start transferring assets immediately, it would be very difficult for anyone to challenge later." The testimony also revealed that Vanessa had backup plans in case her fraud was discovered. She'd opened several offshore accounts and had been preparing to flee the country if necessary. She'd even applied for a second passport under the pretense of planning an extended European vacation. As the evidence mounted, I watched Vanessa's confident facade begin to crack. She'd been so sure that her intelligence and careful planning would protect her from consequences. She'd underestimated my determination to seek justice for Abuela, and never imagined that I would be capable of mounting such a comprehensive legal challenge. The most satisfying moment came when the judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all charges. As Vanessa was led away in handcuffs, she looked directly at me for the first time since the legal proceedings began. The hatred in her eyes was unmistakable. But there was something else there too. Fear. For the first time, she realized that her careful plans were falling apart, and that she might actually face real consequences for what she'd done. But the legal victory was only the beginning of the justice that was coming for Vanessa. While the criminal case was proceeding through the courts, the story of Vanessa's fraud began spreading through our community like wildfire. Phoenix isn't a huge city, and the Martinez family restaurants had been local institutions for over 30 years. When word got out that the beloved Rosa Martinez's granddaughter had stolen her inheritance and manipulated her during her final days, the public reaction was swift and brutal. Local news stations picked up the story, and it became a cautionary tale about elder abuse and family fraud. The headlines were devastating for Vanessa: local woman accused of defrauding dying grandmother, tech executive charged in elaborate inheritance scam, fake will reading exposed in $1 million fraud case. But the media coverage was nothing compared to the social media firestorm. Someone leaked Vanessa's Instagram posts about her lavish lifestyle, and the contrast between her celebration of the inheritance and the allegations of fraud created a viral scandal. Her post about the Tesla and Condo was shared thousands of times, with comments calling her everything from disgusting to evil. The restaurant employees, many of whom had worked for Abuela for decades, were particularly vocal about their anger. They'd loved Rosa Martinez like family, and learning that Vanessa had been stealing from the businesses while pretending to care for their beloved boss was unforgivable. Several employees gave interviews to local news stations, sharing stories about how Vanessa had lied to them about the restaurant's financial problems while secretly draining the accounts. "Rosa was like a mother to all of us," said Maria Hernandez, who had managed one of the restaurants for 15 years. "She always made sure we were taken care of even during tough times." To think that Vanessa was stealing from her while she was dying, lying to her about Scarlett, not caring. It makes me sick to my stomach. The community backlash extended far beyond just media coverage. Vanessa's former colleagues at the tech company in San Francisco learned about the charges and began distancing themselves from her professionally. Her LinkedIn profile was flooded with negative comments, and several industry contacts publicly condemned her actions. Even more personally devastating for Vanessa was the reaction from our extended family. Cousins, aunts, and uncles who had initially believed her version of events began reaching out to me with apologies and support. They shared their own suspicions about Vanessa's behavior during Abuela's final months. How she'd been evasive about visiting schedules, how she'd controlled access to Abuela, and how she'd seemed strangely eager to handle all the estate matters alone. Our parents were perhaps the most devastated by the revelations. They'd been completely taken in by Vanessa's performance and felt betrayed not just as parents, but as victims of her fraud. Dad especially was crushed by the realization that he'd been manipulated into believing that Abuela had intentionally excluded me from her legacy. "I should have questioned it more," he told me through tears during one of our conversations. "It never felt right that Abuela would leave you with nothing, but Vanessa was so convincing, and the lawyer seemed so official. I failed you, Scarlett. I failed both you and Abuela." The guilt my parents felt was heartbreaking. But it also motivated them to become strong advocates for the truth. They provided detailed testimony about the fake will reading, helping prosecutors understand exactly how Vanessa and David Morrison had executed their deception. As the trial date approached, Vanessa's legal situation became increasingly desperate. Her expensive defense attorney withdrew from the case when she could no longer pay his fees. The asset freeze had cut off her access to the stolen money. She was forced to accept a public defender, someone with far less resources, to mount a complex defense against the overwhelming evidence. Desperate to avoid prison time, Vanessa's new lawyer approached Patricia about a plea bargain. They offered to have Vanessa plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for full restitution and a lighter sentence. But Patricia and I had discussed this possibility, and we were both committed to ensuring that Vanessa faced the full consequences of her actions. "She didn't show mercy to your grandmother during her final days," Patricia told me. "She systematically destroyed an elderly woman's peace of mind and stole her legacy. We're not showing mercy now." The trial itself was a media circus. The courtroom was packed every day with family members, restaurant employees, community members, and journalists. Vanessa's attempts to maintain her innocence in the face of overwhelming evidence only made her appear more callous and manipulative. The most powerful moment came when I was called to testify about finding the real will and understanding the scope of Vanessa's betrayal. I described reading Abuela's notebook entries, learning how she'd died, believing that I didn't love her and realizing that my sister had poisoned our grandmother's final days with lies. The money was terrible to lose, I said on the witness stand, looking directly at Vanessa. But what she stole from me that can never be replaced was my grandmother's knowledge that I loved her. Abuela died thinking I was selfish and ungrateful because of the lies Vanessa told her. That's the cruelest part of this entire fraud. For the first time during the proceedings, Vanessa broke down completely. She sobbed uncontrollably as I testified, and several jurors were visibly moved by the emotional impact of her crimes. The prosecutor's closing argument was devastating. This case isn't just about money. It's about the systematic abuse of an elderly woman by someone she trusted completely. Vanessa Martinez didn't just steal her grandmother's estate, she stole her peace of mind, her family relationships, and her final days. She convinced a dying woman that the granddaughter who loved her was selfish and uncaring. There is no crime more despicable than betraying someone's love and trust in their most vulnerable moment. When the jury returned after just 4 hours of deliberation, their verdict was swift and unanimous: guilty on all counts. But the legal victory was only part of the justice that was served. The real satisfaction came from watching Vanessa's carefully constructed world completely collapse under the weight of her own greed and deception. The judge's sentencing was everything I had hoped for and more. Vanessa received 12 years in federal prison for elder fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. David Morrison got 4 years for his role in the conspiracy. But beyond the prison time, the judge ordered full restitution of all stolen funds, plus penalties and interest, that totaled over $2.3 million. Miss Martinez, the judge said during sentencing, "You exploited your position of trust to commit one of the most despicable crimes I've encountered in 20 years on this bench. You didn't just steal money. You stole an elderly woman's peace of mind during her final days on earth. You made her die, believing that her beloved granddaughter didn't love her. There is a special place in hell for people who abuse their elders, and there's a special place in my courtroom for the maximum sentence allowed by law." As Vanessa was led away in shackles, she finally looked at me one last time. But instead of the hatred and defiance I'd seen before, her face showed something different: complete defeat and the dawning realization of what she'd lost forever. The asset recovery process was swift and thorough. The Tesla was repossessed and sold at auction. The luxury condo was foreclosed on and sold to recover the fraudulent down payment. The offshore accounts were traced and frozen by federal investigators. Every penny that Vanessa had stolen was recovered and returned to Abuela's estate, which was then distributed according to the real will. But the financial justice was only part of the story. The restaurants that Vanessa had been bleeding dry were revitalized under proper management. I hired back all the employees who had been laid off due to the financial difficulties that Vanessa had created. We restored the authentic recipes and family atmosphere that had made Abuela's restaurants community institutions. Most importantly, I established the Rosa Martinez Memorial Foundation, which provides free legal services to elderly people who suspect they're being financially abused by family members. The foundation has already helped dozens of families prevent inheritance fraud and elder abuse. The community support was overwhelming. Customers who had stopped coming to the restaurants during their decline returned in droves once they learned the real story. Local news stations did follow-up stories about the restaurant's revival and the foundation's work. Vanessa's attempts to destroy Abuela's legacy had actually resulted in stronger community support than ever before. The personal healing took longer than the legal victory. I had to work through my grief not just for losing Abuela, but for losing the sister I thought I knew. The Vanessa who had stolen from our dying grandmother wasn't the same person I'd grown up loving and admiring. That person had either never existed or had been corrupted by greed beyond recognition. I also had to process the complicated emotions around the inheritance itself. While I was grateful to receive what Abuela had actually intended for me, I would have gladly given up every penny to have her die knowing that I loved her unconditionally. The money could never compensate for the pain Vanessa had caused our grandmother in her final days. But there was also a deep satisfaction in knowing that justice had been truly served. Vanessa's greed had cost her everything. Her freedom, her reputation, her family relationships, and ironically, all the money she'd tried to steal. She'd traded 12 years of her life and permanent disgrace for a few months of luxury lifestyle funded by blood money. The restaurants are thriving now, employing over 60 people and serving as gathering places for families, just like Abuela always intended. I've expanded the business into catering and started a food truck that brings authentic Mexican cuisine to underserved communities. Every day, I try to honor Abuela's memory by treating employees like family and giving back to the community that supported us. I still visit Abuela's grave every Sunday, bringing fresh flowers and updates about the restaurants and the foundation. I tell her about the justice that was served and how her real legacy lives on through the lives we're changing. Sometimes I imagine I can feel her presence finally at peace, knowing that the truth came out and that her family name was cleared. Looking back on this entire experience, I've learned that karma isn't just a concept, it's a force that ensures justice finds its way to the surface, even when people think they've buried the truth too deep to discover. Vanessa thought her intelligence and careful planning would protect her from consequences, but her own greed and cruelty became the tools of her destruction. The most beautiful irony is that Vanessa's attempts to steal everything actually resulted in me gaining far more than she ever could have taken. I gained a deeper understanding of Abuela's values, a stronger connection to our community, and a sense of purpose that no amount of money could buy. While Vanessa sits in prison with nothing, I'm living a life that truly honors our grandmother's memory. So here's my question for all of you who've followed this incredible journey of family betrayal, legal justice, and ultimate karma. Have you ever witnessed greed completely backfire on someone who thought they were too smart to come in? Get caught. Have you seen justice served in your own life in ways that felt almost poetic? Drop your stories in the comments below, because I love hearing about real-life karma moments. If this story of family vengeance and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life drama stories, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear about the power of fighting for truth. Your support means the world to me as I continue honoring Abuela's legacy and helping others who are facing similar betrayals. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember, blood may be thicker than water, but truth and justice are thicker than both. Sometimes the family you choose through your actions matters more than the family you're born into. Keep fighting for what's right, and karma will always find a way to balance the scales. Until next time, this is Scarlett Martinez reminding you that no one gets away with betraying love and trust forever. Justice may take time, but it always finds its way home.